like to thank everybody for coming, and special thanks to the sponsors, the Fern and the Disson families for the food, and the Fader family for sponsoring the shiur. And the subject which I would like to speak about are questions in Mitzvos Tluyas Ba'aretz that are very common and people are not aware of. The first thing that I'm going to speak about are some questions in Hilchas Challah. Challah is from the Mitzvos Tluyas Ba'aretz, and people, besides for knowing that there's a question how much you have to bake in order to be chayiv in Challah, they don't give much thought to the subject of Challah, and there are many questions which come up quite often, and people have absolutely no idea. I'm going to start with a question which there is a very great machlokes and different situations that cause the question to be different. I'm going to start with what happens. A person makes a chocolate cake. I would say that most of us probably never took challah on a chocolate cake. And the reason why is the amount of chocolate cake that you would have to make to be chayiv in challah. You'd probably have to be a professional baker. You know, you have to have a certain amount of challah involved. And chocolate cake is a poured batter. There's not very much flour in a cake. So in order to be chayiv in challah, you'd have to have an exorbitant amount, which people therefore assume that you don't have to take challah from chocolate cake. Why? Because I never saw anybody, my mother never did it, I never saw any of my friends do it, so why should I have to do it? And the answer to the question is because you're baking way too little. If you would be baking enough, it would have to have challah taken. Now, I would just like to mention, Rav Vosner in his tshuvas discussing this issue, he says something very fascinating. When one is taking challah from chocolate cake, you should take it after it's baked. You shouldn't take it before it's baked. You should take it after it's baked, once it already has a bread-like consistency. But when it's still a liquid batter, that's not the time to take it. It's not yet called that it had a Gilgal Isa, and therefore the challah should be taken at a later time. Now, mentioning this idea of taking challah at a later time, it brings to a question which I get asked all the time, and this is a question which one must address. Invariably, I would say the average housewife that's baking challahs for 50 years, somewheres along the line, at some point, she baked challahs without remembering to take challah, and then she remembers after she baked it, and she says, oh my gosh, I forgot to take challah. When challah is taken at that point, it's 100% mutter to take challah at that point. There's a question as to what the nusach should be said when being mafresh the challah. What should be said, in my opinion, was when you take off the challah, you say harezu challah on the bread or whatever the cakes that I'm making now, and you should add in and also say that it should be challah also on whatever was absorbed into the oven. Because when you're baking it, there are blias, which means, I don't know, some flavor that of the challah which is not kosher that got absorbed into the pan, into the oven, and that should have a challah taken from it. Now, I will just tell you, if you can't take challah from it or you can't take challah from it, it's actually a machlokes of Shemazam and Rabbi Yashiv. Rabbi Yashiv was a naysayer on this issue. I myself discussed this with him about 35 years ago, and it wasn't very clear to me exactly what he had to say, except that he was very emphatic that you cannot take challahs off of the blias. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use your oven. If someone has that problem, they should speak to a Rav to know what to do. Now, the next thing, which has to do with these kinds of cakes, now this also could happen with regular yeast cakes, but this is very common. People get shalach manos. Now, people get shalach manos. You could get a lot of shalach manos from a lot of different people, and if you got shalach manos. Let's say every housewife made 3 cakes that she didn't take challah on them because they weren't enough, and you got shalach manos from 10 ladies. It could be that you would end up with a shiur of challah, and if you have them in one kli, then it becomes chayiv and challah. In other words, even though it wasn't chayiv beforehand, it could become chayiv later on, and if one has to take challah from that. Now, from the issues that are issues with this issue is, many times people get their shalach manos, get cake, and it's good cake, but you're not going to eat it all on Purim. So what do? You put it into your freezer. Now, according to Rabbi Yashiv, if you put it into your freezer, and your freezer is a small freezer, not a full-size freezer, you could make a bracha on that afroshas challah. If you put it into a stand-up freezer, which is basically an amma barom gimel amos, which is basically about that big. Just say the average, stand-up freezer is very close to that shiur. Then challah should be taken without a bracha. If it's on different shelves in the freezer, then that's also a question. Each one of these issues are real issues, and the poskim, there are many discussions about all these kinds of things. The different bags, the plastic bags, if they separate them and you can't be mitzvah because they're in plastic bags, or we discount the fact that they're in plastic bags. Each one of these things is a halachic shiur, which many, probably thousands of pages written on each one of these shiurahs, and people are just not aware. You just assume everything is kosher. You got it from a kosher neighbor of yours. Why shouldn't it be kosher? And people are not aware, and these are questions that have to be dealt with. Another thing which I'd like to discuss about Afrosh.
Does that build up? If you get 1 week, you put a cake, and then someone gets cake another week, and you...
Yes, it doesn't make any difference. If they never had challah taken from them, and you have whatever the shiur of challah is together at one time, and as soon as they're together at one time, it becomes chayiv. It doesn't have to be that they were baked the same day, the same week, the same month, even the same year, according to some poskim. Yes?
That would not include store-bought packaged cakes.
Okay. Store-bought packaged cakes all had challah taken from them. Okay? And, the next thing which I would like to discuss...
A drawer, would that count more than a shelf?
It's more or less the same. It's the same question. A little bit of a different variation of the same question. There, it's more a unit that is holding it, and that should be maybe a stronger reason that it should be mechuyev. But the bottom line is, I'm just letting you be aware of the fact that these are things which I don't think the average person is aware that there's a question, and not only is there a question, it's a very serious question, and people should be aware of it. Okay?
Yeah. At this point, a lady could bake one Shabbos, the next Shabbos, and before you know it, she has leftovers, and it adds up, and she'd take challah. Is there any way to avoid that situation by making challah in a smaller amount, even though you don't need to?
Okay. No, I'm gonna answer the question to the best of my ability. I'm just saying, this is what I call the kind of a question whoever is giving a shiur really dislikes. A be'erach question that you want an exact answer. Right? Okay, so, I can only do as good as I can with the question the way that you're asking it. If one takes challah on something which is not mechuyev in challah, he did nothing. Okay? Now, there are many aspects of the problem. How much does one need, flour does one need to bake with in order to be chayiv and challah? The machlokes starts at about 1.2 kilos, and it goes up to 2.5 kilos. Okay, I'm not going to get involved in all the different shittas, but anything which is at that in there, you already have a question that maybe it's mechuyev and challah. Now, people who are storing things in their refrigerator, I would say that it's worthwhile that they keep track to know more or less what they have. Or you can just every once in a while you take challah on whatever is there, and that would take care of the issue. But it's not going to help the fact that you just keep on stockpiling. in and out is not going to help. If it's chayiv, it's chayiv, and if it's not chayiv, it's not chayiv. Something that did have challah taken from it can never have challah taken from it again. So if you have in your freezer a shiur of challah, but some of it you know that there was challah taken from it, it's not mitztaref for a chiyuv. Now another issue, which I'm going to share with you a personal story. When I got married, I was in my mother-in-law's kitchen, something maybe not worthwhile to do, and I saw she was making bread, a checkerboard bread. The checkerboard bread was made with white flour, and I don't know if it was spelt or it was whole wheat, and it was, a bread of she had two different doughs, and they were kneaded separately, but they were braided together in a way that it's one thing. And I told her that you cannot take challah with a bracha on this unless you have a shiur of each one of them. And she said that can't be. I asked Rabbi Ploni, and he said you can. So I wasn't going to argue with my mother-in-law about what Rabbi Ploni did. I went to Rabbi Ploni, and we had a long discussion on the subject, and he capitulated to me. And he said that, yes, you cannot take challah unless you have a shiur of each one. Now, this subject is... Right, because makpidim zelzeh. Different minim are called makpidim. Okay, that's a Ramon Shulchan Aruch with a bir agra. Maybe challah should be taken without a bracha. But the next thing which I'm going to say is something which I get asked this question all the time. And this, again, I'm not trying to give the bottom line for all of these questions. Just you should be aware that these are subjects that a question has to be asked.
How did the Rav handle it with his mother-in-law?
I told her that I spoke to the Rav, and he agreed with me. And that was it. She was doing because she asked the kasha, she asked the shayla, and she got her answer. Now she found out that answer was incorrect, that's fine. We didn't have any, we get along, okay? Anyways, these are situations. The next one is something which is very important. I'll start off with what I was asked this week. Someone called me up, and they asked that they're making two different kinds of cake. They're making cinnamon rogalach and chocolate rogalach, and they want to know, can they be mitztaref for challah? The answer is no. The Ramat says mefurish that if one has karkom in it, I don't know what that is exactly, some kind of a spice, and he's farted over here with maybe to help me out what that is, but what? Okay, here we go. Okay, if one has it and one doesn't, they're not mitztaref. That's called, they're two different things, and they're not mitztaref. So therefore, anything, if you're making one chocolate and one cinnamon, even if you like both of them, okay? But the fact that you're making them two different kinds of things, so they're not mitztaref, yes?
This is if there's two doughs, and you're making, this is
No,
one dough?
I'm taking one dough and I'm splitting...
One 5-kilo dough.
Right, I'm making 2.5 of each. Right. Yeah, okay.
And that,
No. Now that is not true. We're gonna... Right. Once something is destined to be two different things, it's as if it's split originally. Okay?
So if you go back to the freezer, they all have to be the exact same kind of cake?
They have to be, or the kinds of things, I would say they have to be the same kind of cake. It doesn't help if you have a sponge cake and a chocolate cake, that's not... No. Okay.
So one of the question would really happen because you have all different types of cake.
I'm just going to tell you the shalach manos happens with rogalach. It happens with many things. It happens. I'm just giving you an example. I'm trying to incorporate the most amount of wide range questions so you should be able to understand the many things that fall in between. Okay? Now, last week I was asked this question. A lady has a child that's allergic, I can't remember, to poppy seeds or to sesame seeds. I can't remember which one. And everybody else in the family likes what that child is allergic to. So she makes one challah with that topping and the other challahs without that topping. And the question was, are those able to be mitztaref? In my opinion, that situation, I think they're able to be mitztaref because the inside is exactly the same. It's just the topping. You could take the topping off. I don't think that would affect the dough, and I think that they could be mitzdarif. Okay, so I'm just giving examples. These are questions which happen. The last thing which I would like to discuss in Hilchas Challah is probably two things. The first one is from the things which happen and people don't deal with it properly. And the second one is people aren't aware of. The first one is if Challah was taken, and I get this question about once every 2 years. I call that a common question. A person took Challah and they can't find the piece of dough that they separated it, and they think it could be that somebody put it back into the batter, and they want to know what to do. Okay? This is a very common thing. I've had this question when they know for a fact someone put it in. What happens when that happens? What a person is supposed to do is they're supposed to be matir neder on the Afroshas Challah, and they can make the Challah back to what it was originally, and then they're mafresh Challah again. Okay? That's what should be done.
How you matir neder?
You take 3 people, and you're matir neder just like a regular neder with a Pesach and Charata, and you're matir neder.
The whole thing that you say there?
No, you just say that I was mafresh Challah, and I have Charata on that Afrosh, and if I would have known that I would have had to be matir neder, I wouldn't have done it. And then people say mutalach, 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 and you're good to go. Now, the next halacha I'm going to share with you before I go back to this one. This is a very common occurrence. A mother goes away on Friday morning, and her teenage daughter is at home, so she tells her teenage daughter, you make the Challah. And soon as the mother leaves the house, what does the teenage daughter do? She calls her friend and says, my mother told me to make the Challah. Come over and help me, we'll make the Challah together. They finish making the Challah together, and the teenage daughter tells her friend, you could take the Challah. It's a very common thing that could happen. If that happened, the Challah didn't happen. Because it's not the daughter's dough, and we'll discuss in a minute why she can be mafresh Challah. So it's as somebody else was mafresh, someone came into your house and did something, they sold your couch. I decide I want to sell your couch. I don't, it doesn't work. I cannot sell your couch. I cannot take Challah on your dough unless there is shlichus, which was given. No. Okay, it doesn't help in this situation. This is a discussed issue when there is such a thing. Reb Zalman Ba'aran, he would do Hafrashas Challah every single day for all the people in Eretz Yisrael with this idea of Zachin. But even that, which is under a great amount of debate, has to be done in a certain way, and it wouldn't help in this situation. There he did it on his own, and he had it in mind other things, not doing it minei bay on somebody else's thing. And this is an issue which people are not aware of. So that's the first thing. If your daughter wants to have her friend come to make the Challah with her, you can tell your daughter, and your daughter, if you want to let her take Challah, she can do that. Now, I just would like to share with you, I mentioned this on Erev Pesach, whether you should allow somebody else to take Challah from your Challah or not, was part of this subject which we discussed on Erev Pesach, and we'll just leave that as a different subject. But if you do have somebody else do it, you should have them do it with shlichus. Now, going back, a wife, and according to many poskim, people that live at home have the right to take Trumas Amaisris and Challah without specifically being assigned the job with shlichus. Not only that, according to many poskim, it's the job of the wife to take Challah, not the job of the husband, and therefore there's actually a shayla on matzahs that are done on Erev Pesach, who should take Challah, should the wife or the husband? I'm not going to get involved in that, there's a long Kaf HaChaim on that subject, but the bottom line is that if the lady took Challah and you want to be matir neder, what she should do is she should tell her husband, to be mater neder b'shlichusa, and when he's mater neder, he should say that he's doing a b'shlichus of his wife on his dough, and therefore it works according to everybody, that kind of afrosh. It's very important to make sure that you do it exactly the right way. Okay.
He does Torah, not Haftorah.
Right, he does, no, he goes to Chacham and he do Torah. Right, we don't do Hafara because that could be its only Dvarim Beino. There's a machlokes if you could do it. Okay, the next thing I would like to discuss is the subject of people going cherry picking. Okay, people go cherry picking. This is a very common thing. This is like an American pastime which people decided to bring over to Eretz Yisrael, and people go cherry picking or whatever. You can go. I don't know, picking grapes or picking. I have a friend of mine who, just to share with you, in Mitzvos V'aretz, I have a friend of mine who he runs an organization that he buys land and parcels it out to people in Chutz La'aretz, and he has somebody who's a farmer who takes care of it, and all the Mitzvos V'aretz are done there in this land. I've been there. It's someplace near Haifa. And I've been zeicha to do all the mitzvot v'aretz in this field. You go picking, leket, shicha, peah. You get to do all these mitzvahs. A fascinating thing to do, and a person can do that. A person can actually be makayim all these mitzvahs, which most people will call them mitzvahs nadiras. They're not mitzvahs nadiras. We don't live in the environment where that's readily available. But if somebody wants, it doesn't take much for a person to be able to do those things. So if a person goes cherry picking, there are a few general rules that a person has to know. First of all, when you go cherry picking, nobody lets you go cherry picking for free. Okay? You go cherry picking and they give you a basket and you pay a price for the basket. They may tell you that besides the basket, you can eat whatever you want along the way. But you have bought in. You're called a lokeach. And according to many, the lokeach is chayev and meiser, that's kovead for meiser, even though other gemar malachas didn't happen yet. And but if you didn't put it into your basket yet, if you only have a small fruit, let's say if you ate one grape, that would be okay. Probably even one strawberry. The Chazon Ish and many others, I think the Hartzvi also holds like this. If a person is eating what's called arai, which means I don't know how to translate that word into English exactly, but there's no such thing as eating one watermelon arai, okay? So anything which is a complete unit, or more than a complete unit, is already called not arai, and therefore there are many places can say that if you eat 2 sections of an orange, that's already called not arai, because each one is called a beria in its own right. Yes?
So, anyway, on the field, not work nearby.
Okay, but if you have a lekicha, there are other things that can make a gemar malacha. If a person buys it, then you don't need to have gemar malacha. You don't have to have the...
If a farmer takes you on Friday...
If I have a farm, and I say, come to my farm, and we'll go picking, then you would be chayiv. Okay, that's but that's not the situation that people are doing. The people are doing, they're paying to buy stuff. You're just paying in advance. They give you this kli, and however much you put into that kli or into your belly before you leave, that becomes yours. So this is a subject. There are various halachas relevant to that one should be aware of. That if you're doing cherry picking or whatever kind of picking, strawberries or lemons or whatever it is, that these halachas should be looked after. Another halacha I'm just going to share with you, which there is a machlokes hapaiskim, and I believe that in the environment that we live in today, the halacha is a bit different. A person who has a lemon tree, and that lemon tree hangs out over Rishus HaRabim. and the lemons fall. Okay, there is a question in the Paiskim if you're allowed to eat those lemons or not. Okay, now I don't want to be koveya as the bottom line, but I would say nowadays in the environment that we live in, people who want their fruit, they don't pick the lemons that fall on the floor outside of the parameters of their thing, and therefore those things are hefker, and you could take them.
You're saying it's not Geneva or it's not Chayv and Ma'aser?
I'm talking about the Geneva first, okay? Now, I will say, probably it's not Chayv and Ma'aser either, because the person who has their things that are growing out into the Rishos HaRabim, they're not planning on harvesting in it, and that's hefker. And similarly, if a person goes, this is very common, a person goes to Ayalon Park, I forgot what grows there exactly, but they're... Okay, whatever it is that grows there, as far as I'm concerned, is hefker. It doesn't belong to anybody, and you could take it, you could eat it without taking any trumas and maasers on it. What is an issue, and I got this question at my door one Friday night. I was about to eat my chicken, and someone knocked on my door, and they said, I have a question. They live on Rehov Lachish, and that grows in their, in the public, front of the buildings, there's, things that grow. And one of the things that grows there is rosemary. And the person took some rosemary and they put it into their chicken. And now they have a question. They didn't take Trumas and Maasros on those spices. Can they eat their chicken? Okay, so I'm going to share with you a conversation that I had with probably today's world's biggest experts in Hilchos HaTluis Ba'aretz. He happens to be someone that I know quite well. His name is Reichenberg. He lives in Ramat Shlomo. He's the one who runs the Beis Medrash Emunas Ish. And in his Sefer on Trumas and Maasros, he basically quotes the Mishnah and the Rambam, and then he falls out. I'll tell you what the halacha is. Halachically, there are two kinds of spices. There are spices, what are called spices in halacha are things like garlic and onions. Those are there to add flavor to the food. Then there are things like shoresh lavan. I don't know what you call that. Petrozelia, the carrot, the white carrot,
Parsley?
Yeah, okay. So those things are made, at least if you would be living 200 years ago, you put it into your soup, it adds flavor to your soup, and then you take them out and you throw them out. Nowadays, people make all kinds of food out of them. Those are very healthy things, and people are very busy eating them. But in the times of Chazal, the things that were used to put in and then throw out, and you don't eat those spices, those things are not obligated in Trumas and Maasros. The things that people eat, those are. Now, what happened is that nowadays there are many of the things that they used to throw out, and now they eat them. There are many things that they sell them ground up, and they just go into the food, and you eat them. So it became a very big question if they became a food. In other words, theoretically, the way that they're used hasn't changed, but the Metzias is that it became that now we eat them. So in his Sefer, he basically says all spices, you should be machmer and take Trumas and Maasros without a bracha, because it's very unclear. Now, I'd just like to share with you one of my last conversations. I told him he can't eat it. No. Now, I'll just tell you what happened. One of my last discussions with him about this kind of a subject. Somebody over here in Ramat Beit Shemesh came to me, and they have growing in their garden 1 minute they'll come to me the name of the thing. It's this green thing that you squeeze it and this liquid comes out and you put it on aloe vera, right? Aloe vera. And he said, I discussed it, he said, aloe vera, you don't have to take Shumas Samaisis, it's not edible. I said, do you know that there are drinks with aloe vera inside of them? So he said, it's only a gimmick, people don't drink it. Now, I'm just going to tell you, as far as I know, people drink it, people eat it, and therefore the halacha has changed. You have to know, to answer this question, you have to be very aware of what's going on, and this is a subject that people, again, are not aware of. You have to know what is chayiv and Shumas Samaisis.
Only if you're going to eat it?
It has to be made, it's a food, it has to be a food.
If we made it just for cream, then...
Right. Yeah.
What's the difference between the pomegranates in Park Alone and this guy's?
This is part of this guy's private thing. The pomegranate.
Yeah,
no. He has in his house. He has growing. Okay. Now I would like to share with you 2 more questions. Each one of these are very important. I'll discuss the first one first. I don't know how much time we have. The first one is the subject of buying fruits in a place that there's no hechsher or not a good hechsher for orla. Okay, I would like to discuss the subject and give you an overview of some of the opinions that are said on the subject so that we should understand what we're talking about. I'm going to just share with you some facts which I happen to have picked up over the course of living here in Eretz Yisrael for many years. 1 year on Chofesh, I went to a irreligious kibbutz to take a tour of the kibbutz. And this kibbutz has a boutique winery that they sell their wines in Europe. And I asked them, they only use the best wines that they ship off to Europe. I said, what do you do with the rest of your grapes? He said, we sell them to the Eid HaChareidis. He's telling you, this is what he told me. So I said, the Eid HaChareidis, they can't buy your grapes because they have to know it's not Orla. How do they know it's not Orla? So he said, I'm just telling you, this is a conversation I had with this irreligious fellow. He said, and I checked this out in other places afterwards, everything that's planted in this country is registered in the Department of Agriculture, in Misarach HaKlaut, and it's known. And we know where we planted what. And then they come and they buy the stuff that we're not using, and they use that to make their high-end wines. Okay? Now, this is in this kibbutz on Pesach feeds their animals chametz. So we're talking about a kibbutz that's really a not religious kibbutz, but they have this procedure done. And in many of the places, I know when I was a bocher, I worked in Beit Chilkiah, not Beit Chilkiah, what's the other place called? I worked in a moshav, and my job was in the kerem to put different color string on the grapes from every year. Yisodot, right? That's what it was. And I did this. This is something. It's a meticulous job that has to be done, so that you should know what everything is. And they know. This is not whether you're religious or not religious. This is a piece of information which is known. So I'm just sharing with you the pre your shopping when the farmer brings his produce he brings it to the end of his field, they collect it, and from there it goes, let's say, to Tenuva, and from Tenuva it goes to some other distribution point, and then from that distribution point, the greengrocer or Yesh or wherever it is, they buy that schayra. Now, in that schayra, let's call in the produce of all of Israel, there is definitely Orla in there. There's no question about it. What percentage of Orla is there? That depends on the product. it also depends on which part of your season. This is something which I've checked out, and I'll just share with you another fascinating, just a little fascinating halacha, something which Rabbi Vaya, who's probably considered like from the world's biggest experts on bugs, happens to be a friend of mine, and we discuss things very often. I met him once, and I told him, I was mater something today that you would never be mater. And he said, what's that? I said, a lady, she grated the peel of a lemon to make lemon meringue pie. And afterwards she realized she didn't check to see if there are any scale bugs on it. And I told her it's mutter. And he looked at me like I'm crazy. And he said, how can you say it's mutter? It's usser. I said, it's mutter, and next week you'll tell me it's mutter too. So he says to me, why is that? I said, because I'm going to see you again next week. Between now and next week, I want you to go to the Yarkon and examine the lemons, and you will see at this part of the season there are no scale bugs on the lemons. In other words, these things, if you're talking about the whole season, they are infested, but not in all parts of the season is the infestation at the same level. And being that that is so, I can assume that there was no scale bugs on the thing, and therefore it's 100% mutter. Next week I met him, and I said, what do you say? He said, yeah, I have to say that you're right. Now, I met him 2 years later. I asked if he remembered this story. He says, no. Okay, I'm just sharing with you a story, but now this is true also. The fruits that are orla, they blossom and they come to market at a certain time in the season. So you would have to really know a lot of information to know exactly what's going on. But by and large, many poskim say that it's theoretically it's medina mutter to buy without having a hechsher for orla, but definitely that's not what should be done. I'm just going to share with you Rabbi Yashiv's tshuva on this subject. He has a fascinating tshuva on this subject, and his tshuva was written in 1969 or something like that. The tshuva was about, it's like a fascinating story, about a lady who her occupation was of ill repute, and she got pregnant and had a child, and the question was the father somebody who would make the child into challah or not into challah, what the status of the Baal was. This happened in Florida in 1969. And Rabbi Yashiv wrote a tshuva on this subject, and he said, he answered the lady for whatever reason, and he said, this is the exact reason why you need to have a hechsher for Orla in Eretz Yisrael. You know, and if you look at the case, the question revolves around, there's a halachic concept of kol de porish miruba porish. That means that if something left a place where there's a mixture, you could assume it's like the roiv. That means if you have let's say Machne Yehuda, okay, you have a place that's it's not a supermarket, a market that has many markets in it. And there's one treifa store and 9 kosher stores. If you find a piece of meat in the street, you can assume that it's kosher, because whatever left, we assume that it came from the majority of places. If you went into the store and you bought, and you don't remember which one you did, that's called kavua. And called kavua, kemechza mechza, that's called the suffix deraisa, and you're not allowed to eat it. Now, the chances of it being kosher are exactly the same in both situations, right? But it's just halachically, how do we perceive the question? That's what changes. So the question over here is, where does the shaila start? Okay? Now, I'll just quote you part of a tshuva that Rav Shlomo Zalman writes. Shlomo Zalman writes a tshuva on this subject in Mincha Shlomo Chelik Aleph Siman Ayin Aleph, where he discusses if the person who picked it and brought it to market, he was not from a Jew, and he couldn't care less if it's Arla or not. So he says that And not only that, you as a consumer can't trust him. He's not Nemun because he's an our religious Jew. So your question starts when it already left the place of the kavua, and therefore it's mutter. He says that person himself, if he becomes a Baal Tshuva, if he's allowed to eat it, is a shayla, because he was a different person before he was a Baal Tshuva. Then after he was a Baal Tshuva, he could actually rely on himself, or does it call that the suffix happened later on? This is part of Rabbi Yasha's question, and this is many people are dealing with this in the Minchas Yitzchak, Shevet HaLevi. Many people are dealing with this subject, but I would just say, by and large, the question, most of the produce that we eat has well more the amount of questionable orla in there is most things it doesn't even get to 10%. If it's not even 10%, according to many poskim, you would say that it's bottle. The Eila Charedis, they will only give a hechsher if they know 1,000% there's not a drop of orla in there. How do they do that? I'm not going to get involved in how do they supervise the fields. There are other kashrus organizations that if it has under 5%, under 4%, different ways that they evaluate what it is, then they'll give a hechsher on it, even though that there was no...
10%,
no. Miyat hamatzi. It's a question what's called the miyat hamatzi. The Mishkas Yankiv said the miyat hamatzi is 10%. Others say that it's 5%. It depends. That's a question of when is it that you have to be choishish.
Are there specific fruits that there's more of a chashash?
Yes. Every year there's a list that's given out. I have that list. I get that list every single year, and it tells you every fruit how many kilos there are of it in the country, and how many matim are there that produce the arla. It's a very, very exact list. There's actually two outfits that give out this list. You can download it on your computer. It's not okay. I guess we'll stop over here.